Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Darren Hart. I'm Chief Executive of TAROE Trust. Good to see you all. Thanks for joining, especially on this very cold day. So I hope that you're all able to stay warm. Hope you're looking forward to Christmas too, so not long to go. This morning, we're going to be talking about furniture poverty, and I'll be handing over in a few minutes to Claire Donovan, who we're really pleased to join today. Just a few of our usual sort of housekeeping things. Everyone's on mute, but there'll be opportunity as we go through to be able to come in and ask questions and have a discussion as we go through. There is the chat function as usual, so I'll be in the background whilst Claire is talking, and then but I'll be monitoring the chat, so please feel free to raise questions, comments and thoughts as we go through to today's session. We've got the usual time slot of 11 till 12:15, and there should be some time to have a discussion towards the end. Claire tells me that her presentation is about 45 minutes. So what she's going to do, we'll run through the presentation in full, and then we'll have a take questions and our discussion towards the end of that. So without further ado, I should formally introduce Claire. Claire Donovan is Head of Policy Research and Campaigns at End Furniture Poverty. In the joining instructions, we gave some details and a link to a really important report which came out a few weeks ago now, in which it highlights the real importance around tenancy sustainment of furniture, and furniture in the broader sense. So I noted things like flooring and carpeting and so forth as well, which was made reference to in that report. So yeah, I'll hand over to Claire. Really pleased that you've come today to talk about your findings and recommendations, and I hope everybody finds it as informative as I know I definitely will do. So thanks, Claire.
Thanks very much, Darren. Hi everyone. Right, I'm just going to share my screen. Okay, so first of all, I'll just quickly say hang on. Oh, there we go. It wasn't moving. Right. Hello. Yes. So first of all, who are we? So End Furniture Poverty, we're part of a group of registered charities and 100% not-for-profit social businesses, which includes Bulky Bob's, which is one of the biggest furniture reuse charities in the UK, and also FRC Living and Booking Interiors. End Furniture Poverty is here to raise awareness of the issue of furniture poverty and to help to develop national solutions. It really helps that we have the expertise and experience of the wider organisation to draw on, but we are very much an independent campaign. And we do all sorts of things. We've written guides to help people to find essential furniture items. We've published research reports, such as No Place Like Home, which I've briefly touched on, and of course the blueprint that we're going to talk about today. And our third report looking at furniture provision through local welfare assistance was published last week. We also write articles, run campaigns and work with partners wherever we can to build that stronger coalition for change. So this is our definition of furniture poverty. So it's the inability to afford or access basic furniture, appliances and furnishings that provide a household with a socially acceptable standard of living. Our next report is going to look at the extent of furniture poverty. So how many people are living without essential items? And it will show that there are millions of people in furniture poverty, but millions more in furniture insecurity. And that means they've got everything they need for now. But if something breaks or needs replacing, they won't be able to afford to do it and will move into furniture poverty, which is living without one or more essential furniture item. And then there are those in furniture destitution. Those people with nothing, very few or none of the essential furniture items. This could be somebody fleeing domestic violence, somebody moving from homelessness, or even as simple as someone moving from a furnished property, perhaps in the private rental sector, to into the social housing sector where their property is likely to be unfurnished. And it has a devastating impact on people's lives. The term cost of living crisis is being flung around by the media at the moment, but it really is a crisis, and it's only going to get worse. The latest report by the New Economics Foundation estimates that 43% of people, of all people in the UK, including 88% of single parent families, will be unable to afford a decent standard of living by the time of the next general election. The cost of furniture has risen by 42% since 2010. And essential furniture items are likely to be the most expensive items that someone on a low income is going to need to buy. And as I've said, there are millions of people living in furniture insecurity now. So if something breaks, they won't be able to afford to replace it. So our next report, The Extent of Furniture Poverty, will look in more detail at the impact of living without essential items, but we know it can hit every area of someone's life. Sadly, there's a real stigma attached to, and it can mean people miss out on vital support. You're far less likely to invite someone into your home if you haven't got a sofa for them to sit on. This could be family or friends, or a support worker, a housing officer, a health visitor, a social worker. And it also costs much more to live without essential furniture items, the poverty premium. There was research done by the charity Turn to Us a couple of years ago that showed that laundry bills, for example, can be well over £1,000 higher a year without a washing machine if you have to use a laundrette. Your food bills can be well over £2,000 more a year if you haven't got a cooker or a fridge and you're having to rely on microwave meals or takeaways. Of course, the best solution to furniture poverty would be a decent living wage, affordable housing, and an adequate welfare safety net. But in the meantime, these are the areas that we focus on. These are the broad solutions for furniture poverty. To be honest, we don't do very much around affordable borrowing. We don't think it's particularly ideal for someone to get into more debt when they're in furniture poverty, but it's a possible route for some. I'll talk more about furnished tenancies and local welfare schemes in a minute, but pre-loved furniture, as I've said, one of the charities in our group is Bulky Bob, so we've got lots of experience and expertise. If anyone's interested in finding out more about furniture reuse, there are a number of social landlords who provide pre-loved furniture. And we also work very closely with the grant giving sector. Demand is absolutely sky high at the moment. They're absolutely overwhelmed with applications, but they're doing what they can to plug the huge gaps in support. So local welfare assistance, as I said, for those of you who don't know, these are local authority crisis support schemes. In Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, these are centrally run and relatively well funded. In England, it's up to the local authority to decide whether they want to provide a scheme or not. And where there is a scheme, the majority are very underfunded. So our third report published last week showed there are now 35 local authorities in England who have closed their scheme, who don't offer a local welfare scheme. And that's left over 14 million people unable to access this type of crisis support. There are quite a few local authorities at the moment looking at how they're spending their limited resources. You know, local authorities are under huge pressures at the moment, facing huge budget cuts. There's one, we're based in Liverpool, although we are obviously a national campaign, but Liverpool City Council has got the second highest funded local welfare scheme in England. It's a really, really good scheme. They've got to make another £73 million worth of cuts for the next financial year. And one of the things they're looking at is they've said they will no longer provide furniture packs to social housing tenants. And they're working with the social housing sector to ask them to seriously look at furnished tenancies where they'll be recouping the costs from central government rather than relying on local authority budgets to provide that furniture. We passionately believe that everybody has to play their part. So local welfare schemes are great for people who need one or two items. But for those who need more, those in furniture destitution, a furnished tenancy is the only way to provide everything that they need. And a lot of local authorities do want to work with social landlords to provide furniture. So here are some of the broad benefits of a furnished tenancy scheme for a landlord. Better living conditions for tenants, they're being provided a home, not an empty box, can reduce turnover. Tenancies obviously can end for a wide variety of reasons, but having a furnished home can make a huge difference. Sustained tenancies means sustained rental income and therefore reduced void costs. And of course, the cost of the furniture is eligible to be covered through the service charge element of both universal credit and housing benefit. One social landlord managed to reduce their rental arrears by more than 30% due to furniture provision, while another demonstrated a 30 to 50% reduction in churn, in year one churn through the introduction of flooring. Furnished tenancies can make hard to let properties more attractive and help to compete with the private rental sector in areas where that's an issue. And those longer tenancies can help to create more sustainable communities, which can have an impact on safety, reduced crime, and better living conditions. And those with long-running furnished tenancy schemes tell us that they can generate a significant surplus that can be reinvested to either expand the furnished tenancy scheme or to provide support for tenants in other ways. And here are some of the key benefits for the tenant. They're moving into a home, not an empty box. They've got somewhere comfortable to sleep, somewhere safe to store their food and to cook it, somewhere to sit and relax and invite family, friends and support workers into their home. And tenants on low incomes won't build up unmanageable debt trying to furnish it themselves. One landlord reported a reduction in their average void cost by £500 per property due to tenants leaving them in a better condition. And they believe that was a direct consequence of furniture provision. And that sums up the attitude that tenants can have towards a furnished home. So we have researched this in great detail. I'll talk about the blueprint in a second, but this was a report that we published nearly 2 years ago now, No Place Like Home. We interviewed housing professionals from RSLs that do provide FTs and those that don't, and we spoke to a lot of tenants, again, some living in furnished tenancies and some where there wasn't one available. We wanted to understand, the aim of it was to understand why are there so few furnished tenancies in the social housing sector compared to the private rental sector, and we found only 2% of social rented properties are let as furnished compared to 29% in the private rental sector. We wanted to understand what furniture support is currently available and what could increased furniture provision mean for tenants, or inversely, what is the impact of the current lack of furniture provision having on tenants? And here are some of the key findings. The tenant and social landlord participants consistently underlined how the provision of furniture has a considerable positive impact on tenants' financial security, their mental health, and their social well-being. And they also stressed how negatively these are affected for people living without. As I said, having furniture means you're more likely to engage. Tenants living without furniture told us how they felt socially excluded and unable to have positive relationships with friends and family. There was 2 fathers estranged from their families who didn't want to invite their children around because they were embarrassed that they didn't have any furniture in their home. We found that there's currently a patchwork of inadequate options to obtain furniture, many of which take considerable staff time to support tenants, and obviously considerable tenant time to make those applications, and those applications can often be unsuccessful. We found the barriers to the provision of furniture to be, there was a lack of understanding that furniture can be covered through the service charge of universal credit and housing benefit. And there was also this notion that a furnished tenancy can be a poverty trap. But the only participants in this research project who thought that were the social landlords who don't provide furniture. All of the landlords providing furniture and all of the tenants disputed this and felt that provided there was sufficient flexibility in a scheme to allow tenants to return furniture to bring the service charge down, in fact, it was the very opposite of a poverty trap. One tenant said, you know, giving me a home, allowing me to get in a place to lift my head and move on with my life, means I'm far more likely to wash my clothes and apply for jobs and move on, rather than, you know, the current situation, the very opposite of a poverty trap. And we found that furniture provision improves tenancy sustainability. Tenants were much more unlikely to get into unmanageable debt trying to acquire furniture. Furniture is the biggest cause of year one debt in a new tenancy, which of course can lead to huge problems for the tenant, but also rental arrears for the landlord. So on to the blueprint. So this, if you don't know, is a very detailed guide for landlords to help them to understand how to put a furnished tenancy scheme in place, what things they need to think about and what to include in a business case to put to their board or their senior management team to sort of bring people along on the journey and win them round. It's quite long, but hopefully it covers everything that a landlord needs to consider. So I'm going to go through some of the main areas of note, but do look at the full blueprint for more information, pass it on to your housing association. And please be aware, we're always happy to meet with landlords one-to-one to provide more support if they need it. So there are 2 main ways that furniture can be provided to a tenant through a furnished tenancy. Rental, such as three, rental, such as a furnished tenancy or a furniture rental agreement, gifting items to tenants, although the sustainability of a scheme like that can be challenging because it can cost a lot, the landlord's not getting anything back, and selling furniture to tenants, whether new or recycled. So the blueprint very much focuses on the first of these, rental, but some of the most successful operations incorporate at least two, usually rental and gifting. The best offer will vary between organisations, and landlords need to develop the right model for their tenants and their organisation. For tenants with none or very few items, a rental offer is ideal, but it is great if a landlord also has a scheme to provide one or two items for those who need them, and for those for whom a furnished tenancy wouldn't be appropriate, someone who is in employment and not on benefits. These could be pre-loved or refurbished items, and we're hoping to put together a similar blueprint in the next few months to look at reuse and recycling for landlords too. And there is other support out there, but as I've said, it's becoming much more challenging to access. So I've mentioned issues with local welfare schemes and the challenges that the grant giving sector are facing. Many landlords offer a fantastic signposting system, and we have a guide to finding furniture on our website for support workers and for individuals. But it's important that even if a landlord introduces a furnished tenancy scheme, that they continue to signpost and support tenants for whom a furnished tenancy would not be appropriate. So I've mentioned essential furniture a few times. This is the list of items that we believe everybody should have access to achieve a decent or even basic standard of living. I know a television on there, it's not going to be included in a furnished tenancy scheme, but we do ask landlords to consider helping tenants to signpost them to get a television, along with some of the other items on here. Some of them are very hard to get hold of, flooring, for example. And if a landlord is offering a furnished tenancy scheme, we say use this list to consider what items you're going to offer. Some landlords do go even further and include things like toasters and kettles as part of a furnished tenancy. And while it's important that tenants can access these items, weekly charges can build up, and it might be more appropriate to consider including a welcome pack to gift tenants small items like bedding, small electrical items, and even crockery and cutlery. I know some landlords feel that tenants should, look after themselves to a certain extent and take some ownership of their situation. But I would say for somebody fleeing domestic violence, for example, who has nothing, a welcome pack could be transformational at the start of a new tenancy. So there are two main models to consider: a furnished tenancy, the more traditional route, and a furniture rental agreement. So a furnished tenancy is set up at the start of a tenancy, and the furniture is an essential feature of the property and the tenancy. So you're furnishing the property. A furniture rental agreement is much more flexible, and here you're furnishing the tenant rather than the property. For both types, the service charge is usually worked out over 3 to 5 years for the period you want to recoup that capital cost, or the cost of the furniture. But of course, after that period, you can keep collecting the service charge, and the tenancy could hopefully continue for longer. And that income will cover the cost of any necessary repairs or replacements and the staffing costs to administer the scheme. Furnished tenancy should be based on need, but by qualifying for social housing in the first place, the tenant is classed as sufficiently vulnerable to satisfy the DWP. And with a furniture rental agreement, because you're furnishing the tenant, this could be offered to existing tenants as well. And this could be tenants whose circumstances have changed, or for organisations starting a new scheme, these could be tenants who would have needed a furnished tenancy, but there wasn't one there at the time, and they still haven't managed to get, furniture for their home. And then the furniture charges are simply added to the tenant's rental account. So where a need for furniture provision is established, the landlord should complete an affordability assessment to ensure they're offering the tenant a viable solution. Landlords need to make sure the tenant fully understands the costs involved and the responsibilities of the tenant, and help them to budget, which reduces the risk of arrears, bad debt, and adverse tenancy ends. In fact, before a landlord starts a new scheme, we recommend that they go out and speak to tenants, find out what they would want from a scheme, but then, excuse me, also that affordability assessment pre-tenancy, and then ideally at regular intervals from then onwards to make sure, keep checking in with the tenant, make sure everything's okay, but also that can identify any changing circumstances or specific needs or issues, but also can help the landlord to think of ways to improve the scheme and to make it better. So communication is absolutely key. The landlord needs to communicate with the tenant, but also with their local DWP. We have had the odd isolated case where a DWP officer doesn't fully understand that furniture is eligible to be covered through the service charge. But in the blueprint, we have all of the relevant sections of policy, legislation, etc. So just quote them back at them. We spoke to a revenues and benefits director at a large city council who said that they consider a service charge of between £20 and £50 a week, obviously depending upon the household size, to be reasonable. And as I say, furnished tenancy is really ideal for those tenants who were on benefits. So that cost will be covered through their benefits. But we always say to landlords, speak to your local DWP team to make sure the charges will be seen to be acceptable and ensure that tenants won't encounter any issues when they update their UC journal. We've got some sample forms in the blueprint for all sorts of things. We've also got some from Stockport Homes, which is a letter to help their tenants to understand how to update their UC journal. So you can use all of these examples to create your own support information for tenants. So when landlords set their service charge, first of all, they need to set out a term for the agreement. That's usually 3 to 5 years. And that's the term over which they'll recoup that capital cost, the cost of buying the furniture, white goods, flooring, etc. So landlords need to factor in that purchase cost of the furniture, any repairs and replacement costs, and then the operational and admin costs. Existing schemes usually apply an uplift of 50 to 60% to the basic furniture cost. So cost of the amount they've paid for the furniture, 50 to 60% on top of that. And then that's worked out, as I say, over 3 to 5 years. We know that arrears are a huge concern for landlords. So one of the case studies in the blueprint, Gen 2 Housing Association in the North East, they found that they were facing a real issue with arrears when they set up their scheme. But a large part of it was due to the payment schedule of universal credit. They took the decision to move to manage payments to landlord, where the service charge can come straight to the landlord. And this is a route you can go down to mitigate any risk of arrears. The need for the fact that the tenant needs the furniture in the first place should sufficiently meet the requirement for vulnerability to allow for the managed payment to landlord applications. Many landlords don't do this, but it is something that can be considered. We're always asked by landlords, what's the risk of items being stolen or willfully damaged by tenants? But the reality is this is relatively rare. Of course, it can happen. And that's another reason why if a landlord sets up a pilot scheme to try out furnished tenancies, they need to make sure that they include a sufficient number of properties within that pilot to overcome the risk that they're simply unlucky with that particular batch of tenants. All of the landlords running furnished tenancy schemes told us that the level of theft, stolen items, damage, etc., is usually between 1% and 3%. But your service charge is set at a level to absorb those replacement costs, and landlords usually just recharge the tenant in the way that they would if they'd stolen the boiler, for example. Asset management is absolutely key to the success of a furnished tenancy scheme. Landlords need to know where all their furniture is, and they need to make sure the voids teams know which properties are furnished. The last thing we want is a voids team turning up and skipping everything when it's actually the property of the landlord. Landlords need to keep a track on replacements, how often a tenant is requesting replacements. It could be that there are some issues in the home that need addressing. We spoke to one landlord who said they had a family who was reporting broken furniture quite regularly. But when they had a conversation with the tenant, they found that there was an autistic child in the family that was damaging the furniture. So they worked with the supplier to source some specialist furniture, really robust furniture to meet that family's needs. So we say to landlords, make sure you work with a decent supplier and they should be able to help you with all of this. Ownership has always been a tricky one. Who owns the furniture? We'd always believed that when a service charge is claimed through the benefit system, the furniture must always remain the property of the landlord. But we also knew of several landlords who gifted the furniture to the tenants after an agreed period, usually after that 3 to 5 year period. So once they've got the money back for the cost of the furniture, they gifted that furniture to the tenants. And then there were others who sold the furniture to those tenants after a similar period at a token cost based on the depreciation value of the furniture and the fact that they'd already recouped that capital cost. So we had a chat with Support Solutions, which is a sort of a leading legal consultancy in the social housing sector. And they were very clear that once the cost is no longer being claimed through benefits, so once you're no longer claiming the service charge through benefits, it's entirely up to the landlord what they want to do with that furniture. And they believe it's perfectly legitimate for a landlord to gift the furniture to tenants or to sell them at a depreciated rate. For tenants whose circumstances change, perhaps they enter employment, come off benefits, it's useful to know the options. But we do recommend landlords, if they decide to go down this sort of gifting route, to take some legal advice before going ahead with anything of this type. So whichever furniture model a landlord chooses, it needs to be ethical, reasonably priced and financially sustainable. So there are a number of factors to consider, such as whether landlords offer a standard furniture pack, depending on family size, so everyone gets the same, or a bit more bespoke model to meet the needs of individual tenants. And of course, landlords need to recoup that capital investment, the cost of the furniture, they need to cover their operational costs, and they need to look at income generation. Landlords need to think, do they want to replace items at set times? So all white goods get replaced after 3 years, for example, or as and when required, as and when there's a problem with an individual item. We definitely recommend landlords use contract standard furniture rather than domestic. So contract standard furniture, it costs more, but you get what you pay for. It's more robust. It's not flat pack. It comes with longer warranties. And given that the furniture is remaining the property of the landlord, unless of course the landlord decides otherwise at a later date, they need to protect their investment as much as possible. So it is definitely a sensible investment. To begin with, a scheme is unlikely to need specific premises. The landlord's unlikely to need a specific, furnished tenancy store. But as schemes grow, they need to think about somewhere to store returned items, as well as thinking about the logistics too, how they're going to get those items back. Some landlords effectively subcontract the whole service out by renting the furniture and not buying it. And this can make a scheme easier to manage, but of course, then you've got an ongoing additional profit margin, the profit margin of the rental company to take into account, and any surplus is going to go to the supplier, not to the landlord. Whether a landlord subcontracts the service out or not, they still need their own staff, and therefore obviously those staffing costs need to be covered. Savings can be made by rolling duties into existing roles, but where possible, we recommend dedicated staff to make sure the scheme gets up on the right foot. And of course, you're covering that cost through the service charge and your gross margin. Landlords need to think about compliance too. It's not required at the moment for landlords to pat test electrical items, and many don't, to be honest, but there are changes on the horizon, and you should budget around £20 per property for pat testing per year. And all of this is included in the financial modelling section. So on to finances. So the biggest cost, of course, is going to be the cost of the furniture, including appliances, flooring, etc. And that's why it's really important to pick the right supplier. There are a number of procurement frameworks that landlords can go to remove the need for sort of costly and lengthy tendering processes. Framework suppliers will already have demonstrated that they provide the best product, service and price as rigorous processes. Ideally, it needs to be a supplier who understands the customer base, who understands that not every delivery is going to go smoothly. Return visits may be necessary, and not penalise the landlord for that. Someone who understands all of the relevant furniture standards and regulations, with a strong supply chain and a one-stop service. So someone who can provide furniture, white goods, flooring, etc., can save a lot of headaches as well. Landlords should also consider the energy efficiency rating of the electrical appliances that they're providing. We believe the landlord should pay more for more efficient items because of the savings that they will offer to tenants. There are some average costs here, but these are very much indicative only. So providing furniture to tenants who need it has added benefits for the landlord associated with that improved financial stability of tenants. Setting them up in a home in the right way means they're less likely to struggle with living costs, meaning the reduced risk of rental arrears, they're going to be more able to pay their rent and more likely to sustain a tenancy for longer, meaning reduced churn and reduced void costs for the landlord. So the reduced churn with those reduced rent loss costs and reduced void costs were demonstrated by Citizen in the West Midlands, who had some fantastic results with this through their flooring programme. So they reduced their churn by 30 to 50%, and they're investing several £100,000 more this year in providing flooring. Providing a tenant with a home that they can take pride in rather than an empty box, as I've said, means they're more likely to maintain the condition of the property. 13 Group in the North East, they've reported some really impressive savings with their void costs through furniture provision. They had a lot of high turnover tenancies terminating in the first year, often multiple times. They reduced this to 10%. That was a reduction of around 400 voids a year. And their average void costs were reduced by approximately £500 per property too, due to tenants returning the properties in a better condition. They also reduced their arrears rate by 30%, in part due to the provision of gifted flooring, furniture and decoration. So theirs wasn't a furnished tenancy scheme, it was a gifting scheme, but they are now looking at furnished tenancies. And we're really asking landlords to look at flooring and think much harder about what flooring is offered to tenants. As a starting point, we're asking landlords to check their void practices. Too many landlords are still automatically ripping flooring out when a tenant moves out, and that can be good quality flooring that a tenant moves in, there's nothing there, and they won't be able to afford to replace it. So any good, obviously if it's poor quality, that is different, but good quality flooring should be cleaned and left in place for new tenants. There are, as I've said, some schemes out there that gift flooring to tenants like Citizen, but it can be included in a furnished tenancy. I mean, a landlord could even offer a furnished tenancy that just provides flooring, or it can be done through the rental agreement option as well. And that way the landlord can recoup the cost, so it makes it more sustainable, so they can offer it to more tenants and to keep it going for longer. Landlords should work with a good supplier to make sure that the flooring is long lasting, and obviously providing flooring helps to make homes more energy efficient, more comfortable. It reduces antisocial behaviour issues in flats because of the noise issues, and it's generally of course much safer for elderly or disabled tenants or those with small children. So big push on flooring at the moment. It's so important. Hardly anyone will provide help with flooring. So we've included what we hope is a relatively simple but very comprehensive financial model in the blueprint. And on the blueprint page on the website, there are 3 films which briefly explain how each tab in the spreadsheet works. Basically, in the first tab, there's a list of all the sort of main furniture items you would expect to include in a furnished tenancies with costs that are roughly right at the moment, although obviously with inflation costs are rising. So you input which of the furniture items you might want to include in the furniture packs you're going to offer to tenants, and it will work out what the service charge should be on that. That's all pulled through to the second tab, which looks at cash flow, and then tab 3 allows landlords to look at targets and results for things like the savings, the money that they will generate from the reduced churn, reduce rental arrears and void costs. So it sort of sets out all those savings, which we're hoping will be persuasive for, finance teams, etc. If a landlord sets up a scheme that adds more properties to it each year and slowly expands, which is definitely what we would recommend, landlords should expect to see a financial return within 5 to 10 years. So it does take a while, and landlords need to make sure this is really clearly communicated across their organisation, so expectations are managed and those longer term benefits are clear. The blueprint is there for landlords to think about the right model for their organisation. There's a number of key questions in there that they need to think about their answers around allocations, think about whether they're doing it to end furniture poverty, which we hope that they would be, or whether they're doing it just to create a return. Think about your furniture options, reasonable charges. The term reasonable is littered throughout the Universal Credit DWP policies, so it has to be reasonable. Your staffing costs and more. So it's a pretty comprehensive list, so it should cover everything a landlord needs to consider. Having the right staff who buy into the concept of furnished tenancies is so important. The role itself is relatively straightforward. Some of the tasks a furnished tenancy manager or furnished tenancy officer would need to carry out are outlined here. Internal comms are going to make or break a scheme. So making sure finance understands what a furnished tenancy scheme or furniture rental scheme is about. The voids team need to know where the furnished tenancies are. Allocations and lettings need to understand the offer, and so on. And speaking to tenants, as I've said earlier, we recommend talk to tenants now, find out what they would want from a scheme, what furniture items they think should be offered, and which model, who should be offered it. Should it be offered to all new tenants? Should it just be offered to particularly vulnerable tenants? So tenant voices are a key part of this. I must admit, we were a little bit disappointed to find out how little data seems to be captured by social landlords. Hopefully some of the organisations here are different. But with a furnished furniture scheme, especially a scheme that requires that upfront capital investment, it needs to demonstrate its value. So data capture is going to be vital to demonstrate its success and its impact on things like tenancy sustainability, rental arrears, tenant satisfaction. We recommend using a control group, so a group of tenants who live in a similar area, similar property, similar demographics, etc. So you can really measure and compare the impacts of furniture provision. So you ask the questions of the tenants with the furnished tenancy and the same questions of tenants in the control group. Furniture poverty, we've done a lot of work looking at social value measurements. So there's a report on our website too that looks at social return on investment created by furniture provision. So I know some landlords are more interested in social value measurement than others, but if you're interested, have a look at the report and we're happy to help where we can with this. There is a significant social return on investment through furniture provision. We believe providing a full package of essential furniture will create £6,400 worth of social value. It makes sense for a landlord to start with a pilot rather than leaping in with a full-blown scheme. But as I've said, don't start too small. Too few properties and you could be unlucky with the tenants involved, leading to some statistical anomalies that aren't going to provide robust results. But start with speaking to tenants, design the right offer for them and for your organisation, and always have an eye on the future. Start your scheme with ambition and plan for expansion to build to scale. So we spoke to over 30 landlords as part of the, when we were putting the blueprint together. Some of them were landlords who were looking at furnished tenancies. So we wanted to know what are the questions they want the answers to, which are obviously all in the blueprint. And then some of those landlords who are providing furniture. And we've used some of those to put case studies in the blueprint to just highlight some of the excellent work being delivered by landlords across the UK. And here are some of the highlights. So TAROE up in the northwest. They've got a very long running scheme, been going for over 20 years. They offer it to all new tenants and they've got a huge amount of experience. Stockport Homes Group, they offer their furnished tenancy scheme just to vulnerable tenants and they supplement it with a big furniture reuse program. So they will say to new tenants who they believe need support with furniture, you know, are there any items you can get from family or friends? Would you be prepared to take some of these pre-loved items to bring the cost of the service charge down? So the items provided by the furnished tenancy element are as small as possible. And they offer flooring as well through their furnished tenancy. Carbon Homes, they've got a fantastic scheme. It's very, they're being very innovative and very bold, very tenant focused. Gen 2, they're using a rental model. 13 Group, gifting furniture for now, but they've shown some huge savings, which I've mentioned already. And then we've got Citizen, who are gifting flooring and showed some really impressive results with their sort of churn reduction, and they're now expanding and growing it. I honestly believe that figure, if we looked at that figure again, the 2% of social housing properties being let as furnished compared to 29%, I honestly think that will be much higher. There are so many landlords looking at this now. I know of at least a dozen who are starting, you know, who will be starting a scheme in the next, you know, few months next year. Obviously, it takes time to get a scheme off the ground, but we're always interested in new case studies too. You know, we need to learn from each other. So as well as offering that ongoing one-to-one support to landlords, we're keen to gather more case studies to share best practice, to talk about the challenges and the opportunities of furniture provision so we can work together to end furniture poverty. So that's the end of my presentation. So very happy to take questions now.
So that was, well, there's so much included in there.
A lot, I know, there is a lot.
And as we went through at the start, there wasn't too much, and then the kind of the floodgates opened and there's been so many questions. So what I'm going to try and do is to kind of group them up. into. But before we do that, can I just check? Presumably, this presentation can be shared afterwards as well.
Yes, absolutely. I'll email it over to you.
So, okay, just a couple of comments which I've made ahead, and I'm glad that it was covered. One of the tenants that usually attend these webinars sent his apologies late, but said, and I'm glad that it came up because she highlighted about the gifting and the kind of the onward gifting, and he was Cyril, his name is Cyril, was highlighting a scheme called the Holdings in Bourneville, and I don't know if that was identified in your research, but that was for young people. I think it was 16 to 21 age group, whereby they would automatically set up a furnished tenancy, and then there's the option for those young people when they're moving on to take the furniture with them if they can get on the feet. So it's that kind of it's not just going to benefit those recipients of furnished tenancy whilst they're living in that property, but hopefully it will move with them as well as they kind of get on the feet.
Yeah, I mean, a traditional furnished tenancy where the cost is recouped through the service charge, it is not right for every tenant. You know, it's not a one size fits all. For tenants who are in employment and not on benefits, it's really not an ideal route. Although tourists say about 10% of their furnished tenancy tenants are in employment and cover the service charge costs themselves. You know, with furniture poverty, there is no one size fits all. It's about a patchwork, a jigsaw puzzle of the right solutions. But I think that it's really important that landlords recognise that they do have a cohort of tenants who are on benefits and likely to remain on benefits. And for those tenants, a furnished tenancy is ideal because they have everything they need, and they know that, you know, when the washing machine goes in 5 years' time, or they need a new mattress in 3 years' time, it's covered and it's going to be replaced. And that way it frees up some of the funding for local welfare schemes to provide one or two items for those who just need one or two items. It frees up the grant givers to support, you know, different people. But, you know, it's a very important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and presumably those other alternative sources of support, and I'd add into that, I think Val mentioned in the chat function around hardship funds that individual landlords are operating. Presumably they can also be available to those that are perhaps in work but not on benefits, or only have a reduced benefit where, for instance, say the benefit cap comes in, and therefore they are they kind of go, there's more of the pie that goes further. Exactly.
So it's taking that one group of tenants and sorting them out, and then the other resources, there's more left for everybody else. And I do worry with you know, some of these hardship funds. How sustainable are they? How much longer, you know, a landlord's going to be able to continue? How much are they going to be able to afford to put in it? Well, if they've got a furnished tenancy scheme, they're getting an income from that is covering the cost of that furniture, and potentially providing a bit of a surplus, which is coming from central government. So, you know, I just think it's a really important component of an offer to tenants.
Just I'm aware we've got a hand up, and so I'll come to you in a moment, Brian. Is that just there was lots of questions and things around kind of the finances. If I was to kind of just sum it up, it looks like typically it might be for a one-bedroom property, costs are £1,800. If it's £20 per week, would I be right in thinking that you'd be looking to get your payback period in about a 2-year period anyway, over on those?
Usually it's about 3 years. So again, I mean, if a landlord is perhaps further down south and there's more risk of hitting that benefit cap, they might look to recoup the cost over 5 years so they can bring the service charge down. Usually the majority of landlords look at 3 years, and that £20 cost, usually they would expect to recoup that capital cost within 3 years.
And I think it was Deb that made the question in the chat as we were going through about you kind of you highlighted about how there was some evidence in the research that if the property is furnished, then often the property itself is better looked after, and therefore there's a lower incidence of things, perhaps damage occurring.
That was certainly what 13 Group reported to us, and they reported significant benefits and savings because of that, and that's what they directly attributed it to.
I wonder whether there is anything about where if people know that they are kind of at the beginning of the process, know that there might be the option of it being gifted, whether that makes a difference as well, like an added. So whether you could, it might be something for the future that if you know that it's going to be your furniture at the end, whether that results in a higher level of sort of people looking after things a bit more.
Yeah, I mean, it could do. I mean, to be brutally honest, I think that for some landlords, this idea of furniture provision being a poverty trap is quite frankly an excuse, and it's something that they hide behind, and they just say, oh, well, we couldn't do it because of this reason. I think the reality is what we wanted to do, both with No Place Like Home and with the blueprint, was to just dispel all of these spurious arguments. I think some of them absolutely are valid, but I don't believe many landlords will end up just start gifting the furniture. I think they will continue to take that income. It's just about making sure they understand all of their options, and that some of the a lot of landlords have memories of furnished tenancy schemes 15, 20 years ago, and it's about bringing them up to date and helping to understand that things have moved on. You know, this is, but also the support that was available for people 15 to 20 years ago has vanished. Times are very, very different. It's time to look at it again now. And as I say, for us, it was about finding out what was the elephant in the room and chewing it out. So there was nowhere left to hide.
Some really strong messages, Claire. I'm glad that you made those points. Brian's been really patient, so I'll go hand over to Brian, and then I can come back because there's lots more.
Right.
I've really been very interested in this, and I've been trying to hammer it home with the board and the council where I live, because I think there's a lot of other things behind this, including that whole stigma of somebody be giving the keys to, as you said, a box. There's nothing in it. If you have somebody who a landlord is trying to house or trying to home from homelessness, that, you know, what they have is carried on their back.
Absolutely.
In most cases. And if you just give them the key and you say, there you go, you got somewhere to live, but there's nothing in it, it's not a home. They might as well, you know, in some cases, not necessarily this weather, but certainly in some cases, they might actually prefer to be living on the road. And
we found that absolutely people go back to hostels because at least there was a bed there and a kitchen where they could make a cup of tea. We've absolutely found that. I mean, in Liverpool during COVID lockdowns, and they had the whole everybody in scheme where all homeless people were brought in off the streets. Then it was everybody out, and it was about setting them all up with accommodation. And there's a case study on this on our website. All of the RSLs got together. They suspended property pool, and the allocations were all to get these people into homes. Liverpool City Council provided a furniture pack for every single one through their local welfare scheme. So they were gifted furniture because the majority of the landlords weren't providing furniture in any other way. And landlords were blown away by the tenancy sustainment levels. I think it was over 90% of those tenancies lasted and have still lasted. And these are, you know, tenancies that that landlords would have expected to have been challenging because of the background of the individuals, but they were provided with accommodation and furniture, and they lasted because people had a home, you know. And for me also, it's women fleeing domestic violence who've got 2 or 3 children and they've got nothing, and they've been through a terrible trauma, and they're given somewhere to live, which is so important. But how on earth are they going to furnish that property?
It's just, you know, I see them, and most council and most housing providers do it. They will take out, we say, kitchen cupboard doors because they might need replacements, and they store them. They take out old shower units. They take out old boilers, and they strip them down, and they keep the parts. But when it comes to furniture, it goes into a skip. And I'm sorry, you know, why? Because a table can be wiped down, it can be cleaned. A chair can be cleaned. You know, okay, soft furnishings may be a bit different, you know, a mattress or something like that. But if they've got to go and get some.
There's options for all of it, Brian. We've got here, because I said we've got bulky bowls. We've got the world's first mattress cleaning machine here. So we clean mattresses to an exceptionally high standard using ozone and infrared and deep steam clean, etc. Upholstered items, if they've got a fire label on, absolutely should and could be reused. And that's, you know, our other sort of big area of activity is furniture reuse. I'm a trustee of the Reuse Network, which is the membership body for furniture reuse charities. And there are some landlords who are doing furniture reuse well, 13 Group, Stockport Homes Group, and I'm sure there are others out there, but you're absolutely right. Much more needs to be done. You know, we've got a huge group of people here with furniture that they're getting rid of or they've left behind. And we've got a huge group of people here who desperately need furniture. And we just need to match it up.
I think it's the willingness. I was at a meeting the other day, and they're talking about setting up this hardship fund and doing this and doing that. And I'm sort of, but have you spoken to tenants? Have you asked tenants what they need?
They want. Yeah.
Don't just tell them this is what you're getting. Ask them what they need. And
absolutely.
I've got an next door neighbour who's moved in. Luckily, the person who was there before him had recently put new carpets down and spent a lot of money on the carpets. So he's come into a property that has carpet on it.
Well, some landlords would rip that all out before he moved in. So
well,
trying desperately to stop that.
Thanks, Brian.
Right.
I don't know whether Deb is willing to come in actually, but she's just made a question around service charges and whether I guess it's a kind of a philosophical question really that Deb's asking as to whether those that are paying the service charges who are perhaps the least able to afford items, are they in effect sort of paying a premium for those things because of maybe the costs associated with them? Would you find that was the case, Claire? Do you think so?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, for a landlord can't just put anything on a service charge because it won't be accepted by the DWP. So it has to be this catch-all term, reasonable, which they keep using. So it has to be reasonable. And, you know, DWP will pick up on cases and ask them to go through the figures and say, how have you come to this figure? So, yeah, it absolutely has to be reasonable. But I think that, you know, tenants rent a property. They don't expect to own the property at the end of it. If they were in the private rental sector, they would be paying a premium for probably a knackered old sofa and a very old fridge. So it's about what are the alternatives, and I think the alternatives are extremely limited. I think, you know, it has to be carefully costed, and as I say, it's really ideal for tenants where they're not paying that cost themselves. You know, it's coming through the service charge. And it gives them that sort of long-term peace of mind that they've got everything and it's, you know, it's going to be looked after for them.
Yeah. Is there anything, so the one question that came up about insurance, I don't know whether the extent that it's appropriate to kind of make any comments about insurance. I know you picked up a little bit in the blueprint, doesn't it? That because essentially, you know, landlords can help to signpost and to assist with that. Did you find anything like innovative practice?
Yeah, nobody seems to do insurance. We did ask this question. There was one landlord we spoke to who has sort of fire and flood insurance, which they had sort of incorporated into the service charge, but they were very honest and said, because this scheme is so old, if we tried to do it now, I think we'd be sort of called out on it, but we've kind of, it was done such a long time ago, it's just established, and the majority don't. The majority
it was Taurus, wasn't it, that we were offering that in the report?
Yeah,
I remember seeing
the majority don't, and I think that, as I've said, I think that you know, understandable concern that landlords have that, you know, things are going to get stolen, things are going to get damaged. That is not borne out in reality.
Yeah.
So yeah.
How about liabilities? Because I suppose that's another thing where you can see concerns is that, for instance, if furniture or was maybe belonging to somebody else previously, is there any kind of liability that the landlord would or might be worried about?
Yeah, and I think, you know, obviously if a landlord is going to be dealing with pre-loved items, they need to ensure that all items are pat tested and that they're all thoroughly checked to make sure that they're safe and in good working order. Certainly here we, through Bulky Bobs, we have sort of disclaimers that we ask, people to sign, because obviously if they take a washing machine and it's in full good working order and it's been pat tested, and then in 6 months' time it develops a fault and there's a flood, it's to ensure that that there are no sort of liability issues. So yeah, it absolutely needs to be considered and thought about, but it's certainly not shouldn't be a barrier.
I am aware of some registers that are in existence as well, which I think are kind of in partnership with the fire service, that if there are recalls on certain types of products, so for instance, like electrical goods,
yeah,
and there's a recall.
So we have all of that here. So we would go, we had a record of who'd had what, and then it would flash up if there was a recall on that item, and whoever had it would be informed. And the majority of furniture reuse charities should offer that and should be able to do it, and certainly landlords should as well. Again, it's a bit of a hassle, but it's not difficult, and absolutely landlords should do that.
Yeah, you mentioned about the hassle. I know it came up very much in relation to the post-Grenfell fire safety issues, that yes, it might be a little bit of additional work, but in reality, the benefits would be far outweighed by landlords that are engaging, operating those kinds of.
Absolutely. And to be honest, there was only one landlord we spoke to two landlords we spoke to that did pat testing. One stopped doing it during COVID and hasn't restarted it yet, and none of the others did. So it's talked about, but not actually done. But as I say, legislation is on the way, which will mean that it will have to be done. But I think to a certain extent, it was another little barrier to hide behind, as opposed to a genuine, problem.
Yeah, I was going to say one of the positive moves in the building fire safety regulations, which is coming in, is very much around the requirement on pat testing, and I think that's really important to, because and actually there's a shared responsibility. Let's not forget though about tenants taking a degree of responsibility also for maintenance and upkeep and safety within the buildings that they occupy, particularly where we've seen the high-rise type buildings.
And also, if you're not supporting tenants with white goods and furniture and so on, we've had tenants end up sort of get a cooker out of a skip, and heaven knows what sort of safety implications that can have. So, I think that there are some safety benefits of supporting tenants as well.
Yeah. Was there anything that came through on the you talked about it being service charge? Was there anything on kind of fixed versus variable service charges or anything, or did it not go into that level of detail?
Go into that level.
No, it's all right. That's fine. There's always a big debate, isn't there, about as to whether, because who bears the burden of the whether you get the estimates right on the carryover from one year to the next.
Usually it is fixed, but yeah, we didn't. I wouldn't like to make any categorical statements, because we didn't go into that in great detail.
Yeah, there's been a big push in recent years to move towards variable service charges.
Right.
I was just wondering whether there might have been whether that might be operating in the other ways, to why there might be such a small incidence of use of furnished tenancies as a proportion of the overall tenancies within the sector.
I mean, there is one landlord who are looking at reducing the level of their service charge by 20%, not because anyone said that they need to do it or they should do it, but just because they've made such a surplus on it, they think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
So, I mean, everything will differ from landlord to landlord depending upon what they offer. But there are some great landlords out there doing great things, and there are more landlords out there looking at this and wanting to get involved. So we just want to bring everyone along and provide them with as many tools as we can to help them to do it.
I'm going to just open it up just in case I've missed anybody's questions. I've tried to kind of group them into categories as we've gone through. But if anyone thinks that I've missed and they've got a burning question that they think that I've missed, could they either put their hand up or shout out as to if they think we've maybe covered it. I know there's quite a lot. There is quite a lot of chat, and what I'll do, I'll try and I'll try and sort of extract and distribute.
Deb is trying to wave at you.
Deb,
Oh gosh,
had a
right.
question, and I've got a
Yeah, we got Sandy and David. Okay, so let's.
I think Deb had a hand up first, Darren.
Who did? Sorry,
Deb.
Deb, please come in, Deb.
Just a quick one. I was going to talk about the fact that obviously if you rent an item, you'll have an expectation that that item will be fixed within a very specific time frame, and that it will be working because you're paying in that service charge. I'm just wondering about who's done some work on how much it actually costs to get a workforce behind that, given you might not be providing 1 or 2 packs, but you might be providing 2,000 or 3,000 furniture packs.
I think that's where your supplier relationship comes in. So when I mentioned the other charities in our group, one of our charities is FRC Living, which is a supplier. So we're able to, you know, work with them and understand what the offers are that are out there. I will work with a landlord, whoever they choose to get their furniture from. You know, as I say, we are very, very independent. But that's one of the benefits of contract standard furniture, because you've got those longer warranties. So if something's covered under that warranty, the supplier, certainly FRC, will make the arrangements, offer a replacement item when something's being repaired, a temporary item, and we'll sort out that repair for you. But again, I mean, working with a decent supplier would mean that if something needs replacing, then you would have service level agreements to ensure that it's done within a certain period of time, within an agreed period of time with the tenant. So I think it's about making sure you work with a reputable supplier, have some very clear service level agreements with them, and making sure that you are buying the right furniture and white goods in the first place that have those sort of longer warranties, etc. But, you know, absolutely, tenants will quite rightly have, you know, service expectations. So all of it is possible. It's just, I think, you know, we've had the odd landlord who, you know, gets stuff from IKEA and Argos, and you're just not going to get that appropriate level of specialist service to support tenants and to provide them with what they need.
Thanks, very comprehensive reply. I know David's got his hand up, and I know Sandy did, but it's gone down. But we'll come back to you, Sandy, in a minute if you wanted to put it back up. David.
Hello. I've run one of these schemes for well over 40 years, and I had the advantage of being a director of an organisation in the north and the south at the same time. And I always found that if you ship furniture from the north to the south, particularly London, they were really better quality, because people buy more furniture and change their furniture in the north than they do the south. This is probably because of the prevalence of private landlords in London snapping up the quantity. But actually pairing up with an organisation between the different parts of the country, you'll find you'll get different qualities of donations of furniture. Certainly the people change their furniture more in the north. That's just a little aside really from my experience, but one of the things that really interests me is when the housing association or council or whoever is the landlord isn't interested in this type of thing, but the tenants are. And how do the tenants get together? Because one of the interesting schemes I came across was a mutual insurance scheme, which is a cooperative where several tenant groups got together and insured themselves, and they bought the furniture and they hired a management company, an insurance management company, to operate the scheme with advisors and Citizen Advice Bureau advisors, and put the charge under the universal credit. And then they would always, because it was a mutual scheme, always supply new and furniture even when they were broke, because of course the directors of the mutual were the tenants themselves. So why wouldn't they give themselves new furniture? So one of the things that I don't think has been reasonably explored is a connection between a city mutual company such as a reinsurance, Swiss Re or something like that, and how you actually put that together in sort of a hybrid mutual insurance agreement.
Very interesting, David. Yeah, to be honest, we haven't looked at that at great length. We've had conversations with TPAS about using tenant scrutiny panels to sort of ensure landlords look at things like this in sufficient detail. I think to be fair, we are a very small campaign team, and we will we cover, as I've said, there is no single solution, so we don't just focus on furnished tenancies. We do work on local welfare schemes, etc., etc. And I think, you know, the most obvious route is to get the landlord to do it, but that's certainly something for us to bear in mind to look at in the future. Thank you.
Yeah, the one of the things that spring to mind is that the development work needs to be done with the private sector as well, because you're working, the most furnished tenancies start in with private landlords. And if the private landlords are unwilling to do this, then how do you create a partnership between the private landlords and whatever organisation supplying the support to the clients?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you, David. I'm going to go across to Sandy quickly, and then we'll need to wrap up. So Sandy.
It's been really, really interesting, and what David was just saying there was fantastic. Going back to Deb, well, actually, a lot of these things have come about since the Decent Home Standards and the voids and things like that, and their own standards of the voids, because years ago, I don't know if many people remember, but almost everywhere used to sort of get a place and go in. Sometimes somebody would leave a candy striped carpet, but it was invaluable to the people that moved into that property with kids. Absolutely invaluable. But of course, Decent Home Standard, void standards themselves have taken all of that away, and they sort of run scared for it. Going back to what Deb had said, items left, it's to do with them being left and then not being able to accept that item as it still belongs to the previous owner, issue of tort, she believes. And yes, but that mainly that's covered by waivers, isn't it? If you can get the person moving out signing off, yeah, it doesn't belong to them anymore, and they leave the items.
Yeah,
but that again,
yeah. All easily surmountable.
Yes,
absolutely.
Absolutely.
I mean, one of the things we're looking at doing with the furniture reuse network is we want to set up regional hubs. So at the moment, there are sort of black holes in the country, similar to black holes where there's no local welfare scheme, where there are no, you know, not really any sort of substantial furniture reuse charities. So we want to set up regional hubs around the UK with one of our mattress machines at the heart of it. So, you know, people are getting good quality, clean, reused mattresses along with the other items as well, to just provide a much more even distribution. So some of the big companies can more confidently go down a reuse route because they know it's something that they can't, it's not just something that they can do in a particular area of the country, it's something they'll be able to do all over the country. And I think that will help the landlords as well to make sure that there is something available. And also, so we're very conscious that reuse is a key part of this puzzle.
Absolutely.
And doing what we can.
Alone, getting rid of kitchens, getting rid of bathroom fitness, are all still brand new in some cases, and yet asset management is a big thing. So thank you.
Great. Okay. So that just about is a nice segue into kind of my summing up. I think it's definitely one of the takeaway things. If anybody is a tenant that's involved with the landlord, if perhaps this might be of interest, you could share the findings and the results and recommendations from the reports, which we'll send a link to in the post event materials. Yet please highlight the real strong and considerable range of benefits that the report highlights around furnished tenancies and the additional materials that are available there, which again we'll put links in as part of the blueprint. Just a couple of update items before we close. some of you might have been aware that CIEH, Chartered Institute of Housing, and National Housing Federation commissioned a independent panel to undertake some research and make recommendations. Earlier this week, that panel reported. It's called the Better Social Housing Review. Again, I'll include a link as part of the materials to that report. The headline grabbing items of that report is about the proposed audit of all properties within the regulated housing sector to be undertaken. And that's not a drive-by, but a real kind of survey of the properties. Then we're going to take a break from now until the new year. Can't believe it'll soon be 2023. But we've got 3 webinars that we've already publicised, and a 4th one which we'll be adding and publicising in the next couple of weeks. First one of those webinars, and our next one, is on the 11th of January, to highlight Lightning Reach and the work of them in terms of accessing a different range of benefits and support that might be available to individual tenants. On the 25th of January, we're going to be returning to the issue of tenant satisfaction measures now that they've been confirmed, and some of the kind of more intricacies of the nature of implementing and operating and publicising some of those, which we now know the final list, which will go live for the next financial year. We are then got one on the 15th of February around professionalism in the sector, which complements really well some of the sessions we've been doing around stigma recently as well, with the last couple of webinars. And then the new one, hot off the press, agreed yesterday, we're looking at running a session with the Housing Diversity Network on the 22nd of February. So there'll be details that will be coming out, as I said, in the next few weeks. So I think we've made great time. So it just remains for me to say, we'll send a link to this because it's recorded as part of the usual post materials. And then, as part of the post materials, wish you all a really Merry Christmas. Best wishes for 2023. I hope you're managing to stay warm, and I look forward to seeing you all again in the new year. So thank you very much. And a big thank you, collective hands together, to Claire for today's presentation and responding to all the brilliant questions that everyone had. So yeah, great. Thank you, Claire.
Thanks for having me.